Thank you for listening. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. Your support helps this podcast grow and keeps us motivated to bring you meaningful conversations. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to leave a review, share it with a friend, or give us a thumbs up. Thanks for being part of our journey, and we'll see you next time.
All right, so get this. We're going deep into human behavior today.
Yeah.
Buckle up.
Yeah.
You guys sent in some fascinating articles
Oh.
all about transactional analysis.
Okay.
And I got to say, I'm already hooked.
Really?
Yeah. It's all about understanding those moments where you're like, why did I just do that?
Yeah.
Especially at work.
Oh, for sure. I think what's really interesting about this deep dive is that we're going beyond just like the surface level.
Right.
We're peeling back the layers and exploring the psychological forces
Exactly.
that are shaping how we communicate and interact with each other.
And for this journey, our guide is Ilko Stelman.
Oh, cool.
Now, his background is actually what initially caught my attention.
Okay.
This guy, he worked in the energy sector for years,
Wow.
leading teams and navigating like all the complexities of
Yeah.
workplace dynamics, you know.
Yeah.
But then he went and got a degree in organizational psychology.
That's awesome. What a unique combination.
Right.
He's bridging the gap between practical experience and deep
Exactly.
psychological insights.
Yeah. That's the sweet spot, right?
Yes.
For understanding how this stuff actually plays out in our daily lives.
Totally.
It's all based on the work of Eric Byrne,
Okay.
who is the pioneer of transactional analysis, or PA for short.
TA, got it.
Think of it as like a lens, a powerful lens
Yeah.
to understand how people communicate,
Okay.
based on these things called ego states.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of those before?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it's not about fixed personality types.
Right.
You know? It's more like different modes of being that we all shift between depending on the situation.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
we're wearing different hats depending on who we're interacting with
I like that.
and what's going on around us.
Okay. I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So Byrne identified three main ego states: parent, adult, and child.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people might hear those labels and think, well, that's a bit oversimplified, isn't it?
Right.
What do you say to that?
It's true that the labels can sound a bit basic
Yeah.
at first glance, but
Yeah.
the real depth comes from understanding the nuances within each state
Okay.
and how they interact. So, for example, think about the parent state. It's
Yeah.
not just about like acting like a parent, you know?
Right.
It's about tapping into those behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that we've absorbed from authority figures growing up.
So it's like those internalized voices
Yes.
from our past,
I mean,
almost like a script that gets triggered
exactly.
in certain situations.
Exactly. And just like a script can have different characters,
Right.
the parent state can manifest in two distinct ways.
Okay.
The critical parent and the nurturing parent.
Oh, interesting.
So the critical parent might sound like,
Okay.
you should know better than that. Why are you always late?
Yeah.
While the nurturing parent would offer support and guidance, saying something like, hey, I know you're going through a tough time. How can I help?
Oh, okay. So the same ego state, but totally different approaches.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, what about the adult state?
Okay.
This one seems pretty straightforward, but I bet there's more to it than meets the eye.
Yeah, you're right. The adult is often seen as the most rational and objective
Right.
part of us. It's about processing information, analyzing situations,
Okay.
and making decisions based on logic and facts. It's that voice in our head
Yeah.
that says, okay, let's think this through calmly.
So if the parent is driven by those learned behaviors,
Yes.
the adult is more about staying grounded in the present moment and
Totally.
thinking things through.
The adult is crucial for effective communication and problem solving because it helps us detach from emotional reactivity.
Oh, okay.
And that those pre-programmed responses, it's like hitting the pause button
Right.
before we jump to conclusions or let our emotions take over.
Oh, I'm already starting to see how this plays out in my own life, especially at work. Now, let's talk about the child state.
Okay.
This one seems pretty self-explanatory, but I have a feeling there's more nuance here.
Absolutely. The child state isn't just about acting childish.
Right.
It's about tapping into those feelings and behaviors that we experience as children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, joy, curiosity, spontaneity, but also fear,
Right.
anxiety, and rebellion. It's that raw,
Okay.
unfiltered part of ourselves.
So it's like accessing those deep-seated emotions that might have been shaped
Precisely.
by our early experiences.
And just like the parent state, the child can manifest in different ways.
Yeah, okay.
we have the free child, who's expressive, playful, and creative,
Right.
and the adapted child,
Okay.
who's more compliant, reserved, or even rebellious,
Right.
depending on their early interactions.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see how these different ego states
Yeah.
can interact, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes creating those communication clashes we all experience.
That's exactly where it gets interesting. But to really grasp how these dynamics play out, we need to delve into the concept of functional ego states.
Okay.
It's this dimension that reveals how our internal states translate into real-world actions and words.
All right, let's unpack that.
Okay.
What exactly do you mean by functional ego states?
It's all about how we express those internal states externally. For example, let's say you're a manager giving feedback to a team member who's been struggling.
Okay.
You could do it from a critical parent, functional ego state, pointing out their flaws and demanding improvement.
Right.
Or you could tap into your nurturing parent and offer support and guidance, acknowledging their challenges and helping them find solutions.
Wow. So even though it's the same parent ego state at play,
Exactly.
the way it's expressed can make all the difference
Huge difference.
in how that feedback is received.
Totally. And this functional dimension applies to all the ego states.
Okay.
An adult functional ego state might involve calmly analyzing a problem and presenting logical solutions, while a child functional ego state could mean reacting impulsively or letting emotions dictate decisions.
This is starting to make so much sense.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious, if the functional dimension is all about how we express our ego states, how does that play out when we're interacting with other people?
Right.
I mean, it's not like we're operating in a vacuum.
Yes, absolutely right. That's where the social dimension of ego states comes in. It's like a dance between different ego states, where each person's behavior influences the other.
Okay, I'm already intrigued. Tell me more about this dance between ego states. How does that work in practice?
Well, imagine a classic workplace scenario. A boss giving feedback to an employee.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, if the boss delivers that feedback from a critical parent functional ego state,
it might trigger an adapted child response in the employee, leading to defensiveness or submissiveness.
That's so relatable. I can see how that dynamic can create tension and miscommunication.
Exactly. But if the boss approaches the conversation from a more nurturing parent, or even an adult functional ego state, it's more likely to elicit a more constructive response from the employee.
Got it.
They might feel heard, respected, and more open to feedback.
So by understanding this social dimension, we can start to recognize those patterns of interaction and potentially shift those dynamics towards more positive outcomes.
Precisely. It's about becoming aware of how our own ego states might be triggering certain responses in others and learning to communicate in a way that fosters collaboration and understanding.
This is already blowing my mind, and I can tell there's so much more to explore. But before we dive deeper,
maybe it's time to shift gears and talk about those exclusions and contaminations you mentioned earlier. It sounds a bit intimidating, but I have a feeling they're going to be incredibly illuminating. What do you think?
That's a great idea. Let's give our listeners some time to digest all this information.
Yeah, good idea.
About ego states before we jump into the next level of analysis.
Okay, welcome back. We just scratched the surface of ego states and their different, dimensions.
Yeah.
But now it's time to dive into those potentially tricky areas. Exclusions and contaminations. They might sound a bit daunting.
Yeah.
But trust me, understanding these concepts can unlock
for sure.
a whole new level of insight into human behavior.
Absolutely.
I'm up for the challenge.
Yeah. I'm glad you are. So exclusions, huh? Essentially, it's like hitting the off switch for one or more of our ego states.
Okay.
It's not that they disappear completely.
Right.
But it's like we're temporarily blocking access to certain ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving.
Okay. So it's like having a toolbox, right?
Yeah.
With different compartments for each ego state.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes we close off access to one of those compartments.
That's a great analogy. And just like having a limited set of tools can make a job more difficult.
Yeah.
Excluding certain ego states can make us less flexible and effective in our interactions.
Got it.
It can lead to rigidity, predictability, and even those frustrating moments where we feel stuck in a rut.
I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
Feeling of being stuck. Now, you mentioned 3 types of exclusions.
Yes.
Parent, adult, and child.
Right.
So let's break those down.
Okay.
What happens when someone excludes their parent ego state?
When someone excludes their parent, it's like they're tossing out the rule book.
Okay.
They might disregard norms, values, even authority figures.
Interesting.
It's not necessarily about being rebellious, but rather operating without that internalized sense of structure and guidance.
So it's not that they're intentionally breaking the rules. It's more like they're not even aware of them.
Exactly. Think of that colleague who consistently blows past deadlines.
Oh, yeah.
Disregards safety protocols or even challenges their manager's authority without a second thought.
Wow.
These could be signs of a parent exclusion.
Wow, that really brings it to life.
Yeah.
So in that situation, it's not necessarily that they're trying to be difficult. It's that they're operating from a different set of internal rules, or maybe even no rules at all.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, this might sound a bit counterintuitive.
Okay.
But even though parent exclusions can cause disruptions, it's important to remember that not all rules are created equal.
Right.
Sometimes questioning those ingrained shoulds and shouldn'ts can lead to innovation and positive change.
That's a really important point. It's like knowing when to follow the recipe.
Exactly.
When to throw it out.
Yeah.
And get creative in the kitchen.
Right.
So how can we recognize
That's a great question.
parent exclusion in ourselves and others? And more importantly, how can we address it constructively?
Well, awareness is key, as always.
Yeah.
Start noticing those patterns of behavior.
Okay.
Are you or someone you know consistently disregarding important guidelines or boundaries? If so, it might be worth exploring whether a parent exclusion is at play.
So instead of jumping to judgment, we can use that observation as a cue to dig a little deeper and understand what's going on beneath the surface.
And once you've identified a potential parent exclusion, you can start working on developing that excluded ego state. It might involve reflecting on your values.
Okay.
Setting clearer boundaries, or even seeking guidance from a trusted mentor.
Okay, so it's not about forcing someone to conform, but rather about helping them tap into that internal compass
Exactly.
and make more conscious choices. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about adult exclusion?
Okay.
That one sounds particularly tricky.
You're right. Adult exclusion can be slippery because it often disguises itself as impulsivity or emotional reactivity.
Right.
When someone excludes their adult, they essentially bypass their ability to process information rationally.
Oh, okay.
And make level-headed decisions.
So it's like their emotions are hijacking the control panel?
Yes.
And that cool, calm, collected adult voice gets drowned out.
You nailed it. Imagine a manager who throws a tantrum when a project falls behind schedule.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of calmly analyzing the situation and finding solutions.
Yeah.
Or picture an employee who takes constructive feedback as a personal attack instead of considering it objectively.
Right.
These are classic examples of adult exclusion.
Wow. Those scenarios are all too familiar. I've definitely witnessed those kinds of reactions.
Yes.
And I can see how they can create a lot of unnecessary conflict and drama.
And here's the thing. We all experience moments of adult exclusion from time to time.
Right.
It's perfectly normal to feel overwhelmed by emotions and react impulsively.
Right.
The key is to recognize those patterns and develop strategies for bringing that adult back online.
So what are some practical tips for dealing with adult exclusion, whether it's in ourselves or in others?
Well, one powerful technique is simply to hit the pause button.
Okay.
When you feel those emotions rising, take a few deep breaths, step away from the situation if possible, and give yourself time to process before reacting.
That sounds like solid advice.
Yeah.
It's like giving ourselves that mental space to shift from reaction to response.
Exactly. And another helpful strategy is to focus on the facts.
Okay.
When we're in an adult exclusion, our perceptions can get distorted by emotions.
Right.
So ask yourself, what are the objective facts of this situation?
Yeah.
What are the potential consequences
of my actions? This can help bring that rational adult voice back into the driver's seat.
This is great stuff. I'm already starting to see how these insights can be applied in so many situations.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about child exclusion.
Yeah.
What does it look like when someone shuts down that playful, spontaneous part of themselves?
Child exclusion can be a bit heartbreaking because it's like extinguishing that inner spark of joy and creativity.
Oh, okay.
People who exclude their child often come across as overly serious,
Right.
rigid, or even robotic.
Okay.
They might stick to the rule book religiously,
Right.
avoid taking risks, and struggle to connect with their emotions
Well, yeah.
or express themselves authentically.
That makes me think of certain workplaces where it feels like there's no room for fun or creativity.
Right.
It's all about following procedures and keeping emotions in check.
You're hitting on a really important point.
Yeah.
While some level of structure and professionalism is essential,
in any workplace, suppressing the child entirely can stifle innovation and create a stifling atmosphere.
So how can we encourage people, including ourselves, to tap back into that?
That's a great question.
Child energy in a healthy and productive way.
Well, one way is to simply create space for play and creativity, both at work and in our personal lives.
Yeah.
Encourage brainstorming sessions where there are no bad ideas.
Right.
Try incorporating humor and lightheartedness into everyday interactions.
Yeah.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to let your guard down and show your authentic self.
That's such great advice. I think sometimes we get so caught up in being professional that we forget to be human.
I couldn't agree more. Now, exclusions are just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
We also need to talk about contaminations, which occur when the boundaries between our ego states get blurry. It's like one ego state spills over into another, distorting our perceptions and influencing our behavior in unhelpful ways.
Okay, so it's not about excluding an ego state completely, but rather about those states getting mixed up.
Exactly.
And creating a kind of internal chaos.
That's a great way to visualize it. Remember that toolbox analogy? Well, imagine those compartments leaking into each other, creating a messy and confusing mix of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. That's essentially what happens with contamination.
I can already see how that could lead to all sorts of misunderstandings and conflicts. Can you give me some examples of how these contaminations play out in real life?
Absolutely. One of the most common contaminations is parent contamination. This happens when those unexamined beliefs, prejudices, or shoulds from our parent ego state seep into our adult thinking. Instead of seeing the world objectively, we're filtering it through a lens of rigid rules and judgments that we've inherited from our past.
So it's like those old tapes from our childhood are playing in the background, influencing how we interpret everything.
Precisely. For example, imagine a manager who believes that all young employees are entitled. Or that women aren't as assertive as men. These beliefs might stem from their upbringing or cultural conditioning, but they're contaminating their ability to assess individuals fairly and objectively.
That's a really powerful example. It makes me wonder how much of our decision-making is truly objective and how much is influenced by these unconscious biases that we've absorbed over time.
That's a question worth pondering. Now, parent contamination isn't the only culprit. We also have child contamination, which occurs when our emotions, fears, or insecurities from our child ego state cloud our judgment and influence our decisions.
So instead of responding from a place of logic and reason, we're letting those past hurts or anxieties dictate our actions.
For example, let's say someone is terrified of public speaking because they were ridiculed as a child. Or someone might avoid taking risks because they're afraid of failing and disappointing their parents. These are all examples of child contamination where those early experiences are still shaping our behavior in the present.
You know, I'm starting to realize that I've probably experienced both parent and child contamination in my own life. It's amazing how those early experiences can have such a lasting impact.
You're not alone. Most of us have encountered these contaminations to some degree. The key is to become aware of them so we can start to challenge those distorted perceptions and make choices that are aligned with our true selves.
This is all so insightful. I'm starting to see how understanding exclusions and contaminations can be game-changing. In terms of improving communication and relationships.
Absolutely.
But before we dive into the practical applications of all this knowledge, maybe it's time for our listener to take a mental break and reflect on what we've uncovered so far.
That's a great idea. We've covered a lot of ground today. And it's important to let these concepts sink in.
Good idea.
So for our listener, think about a recent conflict or misunderstanding you've experienced. Could exclusions or contaminations have played a role? We'll come back to explore that question and more in the final part of our deep dive.
All right. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into transactional analysis.
Yeah.
So we've explored this fascinating world of ego states, exclusions, contaminations. The question is, how do we actually use all of this knowledge to improve our communication and relationships? I'm ready to put this theory into action.
I'm with you. It's one thing to understand the concepts, but the real magic happens when we apply them to our real-life interactions.
Okay, so where do we even start? Is there a step-by-step guide to becoming a transactional analysis guru?
Well, there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. Yeah.
But the foundation of any real change is self-awareness.
Okay.
Start paying attention to your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
Right.
What's the inner dialogue running through your head?
Right.
What emotions are bubbling up? What's driving your actions?
So it's like becoming a detective of our own inner world.
And as you observe those internal patterns, you can start identifying which ego state is in the driver's seat at any given moment.
Okay.
Are you approaching a situation from a judgmental parent, a rational adult, or an emotionally driven child?
Okay, so let's say I'm noticing a pattern of critical parent thoughts popping up.
Okay.
Especially at work. I'm finding myself judging colleagues, focusing on their flaws, and feeling frustrated when things aren't done my way, right?
Yeah.
What do I do with that awareness?
That's great that you're recognizing those patterns.
Yeah.
Awareness is the first step towards change. Now, instead of letting that critical parent run the show, try consciously shifting into your adult state.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what are the facts of this situation? What's the most constructive way to address this issue?
So it's like hitting the mental pause button.
Exactly.
And choosing a different response.
Right.
So instead of reacting with criticism, I can take a breath and respond with a more understanding and problem-solving approach.
Exactly. It's not about suppressing those parent thoughts altogether.
Right.
They're part of who we are. It's about learning to access our adult ego state more consistently.
Right.
So we can make conscious choices rather than defaulting to those automatic reactions.
This is starting to feel really empowering.
Yeah.
It's like we're gaining more control over our interactions.
Totally.
But what if I'm noticing these patterns in someone else?
Okay.
Let's say I have a coworker who seems to be constantly operating from an excluded child state. Right? Always following the rules, never taking risks, and struggling to connect with others on a personal level. How do we approach that situation?
That's a great question. It can be tricky to navigate those situations.
Right.
The key is to approach it with empathy and a genuine desire to help.
Okay.
Instead of pointing fingers or labeling them, try to understand their perspective. What might be driving their behavior? Could it be fear of failure? Or a need for control?
So instead of saying, hey, you need to loosen up and have more fun.
Right.
I could try to understand where that rigidity is coming from.
Yeah.
And find ways to create a more supportive and encouraging environment.
Exactly. You could try saying something like, I've noticed you seem a bit stressed lately. Is everything okay? I'm wondering if there's anything I can do to help.
That feels so much more approachable.
Right.
And collaborative than just telling someone to change.
Totally. And remember, sometimes the most powerful way to influence others is by modeling the behavior we want to see. If you want someone to tap into their child state and be more playful and creative, show them how it's done. Share your own ideas. Take a few risks.
Right.
And don't be afraid to have some fun.
I love that. It's like saying, hey, it's safe to be yourself here.
Exactly.
But what about those pesky contaminations?
Yeah.
How do we deal with those distorted perceptions and unexamined beliefs that can sabotage our communication and relationships?
Contaminations can be a bit trickier to address.
Right.
Because they often operate below the surface of our awareness.
Yeah.
But here's the good news. Once we start shining a light on those unconscious biases and limiting beliefs, we can begin to challenge and transform them.
Okay, so awareness is key here too.
Absolutely. Start paying attention to those moments where you're making judgments or assumptions about others.
Right.
Ask yourself, is this belief based on facts or on something I've inherited from my past? Is this perception truly accurate, or is it being colored by my own fears or insecurities?
I'm starting to see how this ties back to that whole self-awareness piece.
Exactly.
The more we understand ourselves, the better equipped we are.
Totally.
To navigate these complexities.
And don't be afraid to seek outside perspectives.
Oh, right.
Talk to trusted friends, colleagues, or even a therapist. They can offer valuable insights and help you identify those blind spots that you might not be able to see on your own.
That's such a great reminder.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need that outside perspective to challenge our assumptions and help us grow.
And here's another powerful tool. Feedback. Don't be afraid to ask for it.
Right.
And be open to receiving it, even if it's not always easy to hear.
So I'm noticing that I tend to get defensive.
Yeah.
When receiving feedback. That could be a sign of a contamination or an exclusion at play.
It could be. That defensiveness might stem from an adapted child fear of being criticized or a parent contamination that tells you you're not good enough. By understanding those underlying dynamics, you can start to reframe how you receive feedback and use it as an opportunity for growth.
This is all so incredibly insightful.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a whole new toolkit.
Awesome.
For understanding myself and the people around me.
That's the power of transactional analysis.
Right.
It's not just a theory, it's a set of practical tools for transformation.
Well, you've certainly given our listeners a lot to think about today. As we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave you with this question. How can you use these insights to create more positive and productive interactions in your own life? Whether it's at work, at home, or in your relationships, transactional analysis offers a powerful framework for understanding human behavior and unlocking your full potential.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey.
And to our listener, thanks for diving deep with us. We hope you've gained some valuable insights that will help you navigate the complexities of human interaction with greater awareness and skill.
Thank you for listening. We really appreciate you spending your time with us. Your support helps this podcast grow and keeps us motivated to bring you meaningful conversations. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to leave a review, share it with a friend, or give us a thumbs up. Thanks for being part of our journey, and we'll see you next time.